Hi, everybody. My name is Felix Marquez. I'm a family support specialist here out on Long Island, and a adoptive father of four children, sibling group, and very pleased to have anything to do with Angela Tucker. And I'll pass it on, Ellen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Early. I'm a family support specialist for the Central New York and Southern Tier area. I'm also an adult adoptee, and I'm also a kinship parent to my grandson, who is 7. And with that, I'll pass it on to Angela, who we're so grateful to be here tonight.
Hello, thank you all. I'm so excited to be here as well. It's late afternoon for me over here on the West Coast. I'm in Seattle, Washington, and I'm excited to dive into the book. It is such an honor to have people actually read it, and it's fun to see so many familiar faces. So hello.
Just briefly before we begin, there's just a couple of house rules. A lot of you know them already, but I'm going to run through it for all the newcomers as well. And first, no judgment, no guilt. As we all hear different experiences and points of view, please remember that this is a safe space to share openly, and we will not guilt or judge others. Also, be sure to take care of yourself. If things start to feel a little heavy and you need to step away for a break, please do so. Sometimes we need a moment to process or let go of some long-held thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and that's okay and encouraged. Confidentiality. What you see here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. Please remember that this is a safe place to share and bring your vulnerability. And to that end, we ask that you do not talk about members of the group outside of the group. The concepts and the takeaways are what's important, not who said what. Please be sure to ask questions. As Cheryl mentioned, just enter them into the chat box, and Cheryl will be sure to ask them. And finally, please respect Angela's decision regarding whether or not to answer a particular question. Okay, Ellen.
All right. So thank you all for being here. This is a great turnout, and we're very excited. So we have some predetermined questions that we will ask Angela. Feel free, if you have questions, place them in the chat. Cheryl will be monitoring the chat, and she will get to them as possible. So with our first question, we really enjoyed the descriptions of how throughout the search process and even into reunion, your mom was an important support person for you, Angela. Can you reflect on how your search and reunion affected your relationship with her?
It definitely strengthened it. My mom, I know research talks about this too, for so often adoptive parents kind of fear, maybe deep down have fears about openness for their children and physical contact and relationships with their biological parents. But the research actually says that an adoptee has the great potential to increase the positive relationship with their adoptive parents through this process, and that definitely happened for me. I know some of you may have heard this before, but I like to share this very impactful moment during the making of the documentary, which my husband filmed over a decade now. It was a while back, but filmed me searching for my birth parents, meeting them. And so my husband had interviewed people like my mom, and I wasn't in the room when he was doing that. And so I didn't hear some of those interviews until I watched the film for the first time. And one thing that was really impactful was that my mom said to Brian during this interview that they had done that she was afraid of being replaced if I found my birth mother. And I was shocked when I heard that, because I'd never heard her say that. And I was also really grateful, thankful, impressed, felt so loved to know that my mom didn't ever burden me with that. You know, like, she may have had this feeling, but the fact that I had never known that my entire life made me feel like she had her boundaries straight. Like, she knew that yes, this might be a legitimate thought or fear, but that it wasn't appropriate to talk to me about that. If she would have, I'm not sure that I would have searched. And I hear this from other adoptees who say, like, I don't want to search because I don't want to hurt my parents' feelings. And for me, not knowing that my mom even had an inkling of fear around that helped me just be able to search and look for my birth mom. But yeah, throughout the whole process, it was just lovely. I remember when we were flying across the country to meet my birth mother the year after. So she rejected me the first time. And then the next year when we went to meet her, my mom was still like right next to me in the airplane, just saying, you know, this could go so many different ways, still like allowing me to have the breadth of experiences and not simply excitement. And but she's like, it could be really hard. And so those sorts of just her being right alongside me was awesome. I think another thing, I have a picture of my mom and my birth mom in my office here, and it's one of my all-time favorite photos. Seeing them together makes my heart leap in ways that I have never felt otherwise. And just knowing that it's genuine is awesome. My parents, they went on a road trip like a couple years ago from Washington State across the country. My birth mom now lives in Mississippi, and I'm just here in Seattle, and I get a photo from them, and they're out with my birth mother having lunch together. And I just like, it really feels super genuine, like their love for her. And that has just impacted my relationship with my mom and my dad in such positive ways.
That's amazing. That's amazing stuff to hear. Thank you. Okay, and like I said, feel free if you have questions to go ahead and drop them in the chat. Oh, sorry. I can't control for household noises. Okay, so our second question, which is kind of a two-part question. So as your reunion with both sides of your birth family progressed, how did you navigate the issues of classism and even the different cultures from the Pacific Northwest and then the American South? That seemed like a pretty stark difference when we were reading the book.
Huge difference. And I can start with a story that's only funny now in hindsight. That is that after I finished writing the book, my publisher said, do you want to do an audiobook? I didn't realize that was in the contract. So I'm like, sweet. Yes, that's cool. And then they said, okay, you're going to have to audition for it. I was like, I have to audition to read my own book? And I didn't realize that. I know now, like, it is a really hard thing to read, and I understand it's a professionals do it. And but at the same time, I couldn't help but ask, like, okay, if I don't get the gig, who will read my book? And their response was something like, we'll just find like, someone that kind of sounds like you and is from the area. So maybe like a white person from the Northwest. And I was like, oh, that is so offensive. And it speaks to just this exact question of like my identity and trying to fuse together Pacific Northwest upbringing, but biological family roots in the South. And so many transracial adoptees have heard that you sound white microaggression so often. And so to hear it kind of come from my publisher, who had read my whole book by that point, was really tricky. So in that sense, it kind of doesn't end. But I think when we were in the throes of the reunion, the class issues were kind of always top of mind. Things like, what am I going to wear the first time I see my birth family? To me, I was thinking like my best dress and high heels and, money, basically. Like if I wasn't in their proximity, which I know is poverty, I would think I'm just going to put on some cute clothes. But being there, I was really aware of my middle class uh lifestyle. Things like, renting a big car for my huge family and just driving it all over the place, when a lot of my birth family don't have cars, or they were starting their cars with the screwdriver, or different markers of poverty. And so that was, it just kind of served to drive a little wedge in between me and my birth family, but not in a negative way, especially my birth dad. They were so accepting, but there were often jokes, white people jokes, which could also be called like rich people jokes, I think. But they would always be kind of jabbing in that sense. And thankfully, my husband, who was a recipient of a lot of the jokes too, because here he was often with all his camera gear and microphone and all of this fancy equipment. Thankfully, he was not offended in the slightest. Like, he really understood his position, his place as a white man, and that went for all the rest of us too. It's just a little hard for me to have to articulate. I think there were things like, an example of a joke was like, I might go on, if we're driving around, I might say like, oh gosh, I wonder if we draw a map of Chattanooga, like where the redlining happened. Like, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm kind of a tourist in the city. And their response would be like, oh, there she goes with that white people's education again. And for me, it's kind of, this is the culture I was brought up in, where my parents value education and learning, and all of our trips were often like embedded with exercises, academia. I liked that. But to my birth family, when I would do that, it came across as like kind of snooty, I think. And that's just an example. And it bled into difference in culture. Because although I may have known a lot about the history of the town and of the South and of Tennessee and kind of the politics around it, and I had researched a lot about kind of the racial segregation, I'd done all that stuff, I still didn't always understand everything they said. And so there was this difference in my book knowledge versus my just street smarts that I didn't have. And that often was embarrassing. I remember, for example, them using the word high yellow, the term, and I was kind of like, huh? I think it was partially their accent too, but that was like a really stark example where I was clearly not, I had not grown up in the South with Black folks, although I knew a lot about Black history, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does. Thank you for sharing that. The second part of that question was, have you been able to integrate new family traditions and new cultural ideas into all sides of your family?
Well, I did introduce my birth family to the movie The Sound of Music, which they watched. So, like, going from kind of Whitelandia to their Black culture, that was kind of funny, because my mom had created this book for them of kind of my upbringing, and in one of the pages she wrote, Angela has seen The Sound of Music like 10,000 times. And they were like, huh? Like, what? And so they watched it, and I was mortified, because back then, being 25, I was like, that is the whitest thing ever, Mom. Like, don't tell them I did that. So there's that. And then, but I think from the other way, my birth dad's side of the family for sure has been really lovely in bringing me in. I remember, and I wrote about this, but my birth dad's funeral was heavily Black in the sense of the traditions. For me, I had never I talk about this, but I had never gone to a wake. I had not gone to, we didn't call it homegoing, you know, we called them funerals. In my family, we cremate folks. And my birth family, they're like, why would you burn someone's body? That sounds crazy. So there were things during the funeral that were where they really kind of brought me into the fold. I didn't realize that it was customary for my birth family to not just wear all black to a funeral. I wore all black, but my birth dad's favorite color was red, and everybody else just knew to wear a combination of black and red, and I did not. And so when I showed up, some of my aunts just kind of slyly put some red, like I think someone put a red rose on my dress. Someone else gave me something else red. And so it wasn't like a shaming moment. And I know that everybody in my adoptive family had the thought of like, she's not raised here, she's not from here, but she's one of us. Ultimately, like, honestly, it really sucks. It's really embarrassing. But that's why I'm so focused on not just transracial families having some form of openness, but like genuine community, you know. And I think this is also where I get passionate about perhaps not moving kids across the country. You know, like, could I have been moved within the state of Tennessee? That alone may have helped. And these are things that I don't think are often thought about. You know, the fact that I was moved from Tennessee to Washington State, still domestic, still the United States, but the impacts are things like that, which are embarrassing. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I agree. I hear what you're saying. We do have a question in the chat that came directly to me, Cheryl. So I'm going to ask this one first.
Okay.
It's from Catherine. In your documentary Closure, the overwhelming voices come from your relatives. We hear very little of your voice in that story, and I can relate to that. And I was wondering if you could comment on the transition to your book and later podcast where we get to hear your voice. In my experience, my adoption is all about my adoptive family and their experience. I'm a minor side character in the greater story, and I do not get a voice.
Really great comment and observation of seeing kind of my evolution in taking control of my voice. The movie Closure was never intended to be public. It was home video footage for me to have. So the purpose of getting everyone else's voices wasn't ultimately to create this documentary. And that really was like happenstance. We're grateful for it. But my husband didn't set out to have a story arc. So my voice is quiet, both because it wasn't intended for public, although I'm glad it is now. I am thankful, though, that my adoptive parents' voices are also fairly quiet in the film. They do a lot of expository setting up of our family, but it isn't fully dominated by them, which is the norm. However, after the film came out and we started doing the festival circuit, that's when I really started hearing from so many other adoptees who were amazed that my story was out there in the first place. Not that it's that sensational or different of a story than many other adoptees, but people would say, I just can't believe your adoptive parents are okay with you telling your story like this, being out and saying certain things about adoption that you feel. And I was pretty surprised to learn about that landscape. I didn't realize how many adoptees felt muzzled because simply their adoptive parents were kind of overbearing. So when so creating a podcast was kind of my approach to get more adoptee voices out there, varying spectrum. And then the book was really cool to be in complete control of exactly what was said. That is something I didn't know that I needed way back when the movie came out or when my podcast came out, even. Writing it and having like a slow, deliberate process was really, I guess the best word is I felt in control. I remember there was a time when we finally did decide to make the movie kind of something more public, and my husband was trying to figure out all the editing, where different things should go in the film and to make it make sense. And he said something like, this scene isn't really good, like it's not very informative, it doesn't really serve a purpose. And we were just in the car or something, and I was really unexpectedly upset because I was like, my life is not a scene. Like, he was using these film, movie words, and I'm like, this is. And so I realized, in writing a book and being in control of how to tell a story, that felt safer for me. I think it's also it was really deliberate for me to keep my adoptive parents kind of one-dimensional in the book. It, it was funny and awesome, but when I first gave the manuscript to my parents and said, all right, this is like my final edit, so if there's any changes, you need to let me know now. So they both read it, and they had a couple responses that were funny and fun, but one of them was really enlightening and profound, and they said, we are really glad that you kept us really kind of boring and one-dimensional, because we know that if you gave us any more airtime, then the story would quickly become all about us. And if I gave them any complexity at all, which of course my relationship with my parents is way more complicated than in the book, right? But in the book, my parents recognized to even give a hint about us getting on each other's nerves or anything would drastically change the book from being adoptee centered, which was my whole focus. So I'm thankful that they understood that that was my goal, and there's no offense taken or anything like that.
Oh, thank you.
The other funny thing I should say about that part was, after they talked about that part, I said, okay, is there any other details that you want me to change or anything I got wrong? And my dad was like, yeah, you said that I marinate steaks for days. That is so crazy, and you don't even know what you're talking about. Nobody marinates steaks. I marinate the ribs. And he was just like, I will be so mortified if you have to change it. And I loved that, because it was like, out of all the heavy, meaty adoption related and race related stuff in the book, that was the thing for him. It's also his way of saying to me and to all of my parents' kids, like, we're not going to tone police you. How you guys see the world and how you view your truth is your truth. So it's not, even if they did disagree with things, they would not have used that moment to say, change this or change that. So I just, again, I think that goes to the first question of my relationship with my parents has really grown exponentially, because I've learned these things about them, that they can handle my truth and how I see the world. And that's a direct result of their actions choosing to adopt me and bring me across the country.
Thank you. So there's 3 questions in here, and I'm gonna Mac asked, he said, that's so interesting, Angela, about the class difference. Have you picked up the vernacular of the Deep South and Black culture language system since recognizing that class differential? And how does that inform for you the significance of code switching that may allow or invite a comfortability and sense of belonging and communion with your birth family?
Yeah, I mean, I don't use AAVE, which is African American Vernacular. Even if I'm code switching in a place where I'm hanging with my birth family or my birth sister, it just doesn't feel authentic to me. And again, I just haven't spent a ton of time in the South. And so I think what I have thankfully learned is that there's so many different ways to be Black. And for me, I am a Black woman that has grown up in the Pacific Northwest, so I am aware of Birkenstocks. I don't wear them, but my parents do, and I know and like having a greater community of Black folks in my life now who all pretty much are Pacific Northwest folks. It's allowed me to be increasingly more comfortable in my skin and how I speak. And so that I can pretty much try to stay who I am, no matter who I'm with, including my birth family. Also, thankfully, that my birth family is really accepting. Like I said, there's the jokes that they make for how I talk, and it's truly in love, and it actually feels like I'm part of the family now because they can like joke with me, and so that feels good. So yeah, I think I haven't. I don't code switch in that sense when I'm in the South, but it's pretty conscious decision, and it has not impeded my ability to feel comfort or belonging within those families.
Thank you. And then there was a question about your life book. How did your first family respond to the life book that your mom prepared for them? Were they glad to receive it or were upset by all that they missed in your life?
It was very emotional. My birth mother is the only one that I know that has it and has looked at it. And she guards it with her life. It is in the most precious place in her apartment, along with other photos that she's gotten now and little things that my parents or I send her is just like gold. But when I was with her and she was looking through the life book, the comments like, "Oh, you never would have gotten that if you were with me," or "I'm so glad they did that for you," or like those comments just made me hurt inside because I think I I really disagree, and I wish that my birth mother could know that like her poverty is not a personality trait of hers, which I think is what she thinks it is. It's not her being lazy. My parents' ability to have us do fun things, piano lessons, basketball all over the country, all the extracurriculars that I got, that's not because my parents are like internally better, stronger. I wish my birth mother could know that there's systemic forces at play, but instead it's like a personal thing. Like, I couldn't do that for you. I'm glad they could. In my brain, I'm like, our policies, how our laws are written, have kept you and her mom, my birth mom's mom, like the generations have been oppressed because of those things. And but I don't say that. That's partly where I would then get on the soapbox and be educating, and that would be strange. But I do try often to make remarks about basically class in America, but it doesn't really get comprehended in the same way. I also sometimes would respond by saying like, yeah, it is cool that I got to go to Disneyland, but I'm jealous that my birth sister Nene got to grow up knowing you. And for me, knowing my birth mother would be so much better than going to Disneyland. But I don't think my birth mother really hears it like how I mean it. I'm like, I am serious. But I think for her, it's kind of just like, oh, what a nice thing to say. Um, so that can be, it definitely feels like stuck in the middle and unable to adequately communicate effectively. Um, but I think that's what money does. It makes us all because money is really a frustrating concept and thing. So no, they weren't upset. My birth mom wasn't upset. She's really actually, I think it has helped her healing to know that I was cared for and to like know it with proof. You know, the pictures and letters my adoptive parents sent to her every year from when I was like 2 to 18 or whatever. It's like proof that they cared every year. It's not just, oh, we met you, Angela's 24 now, and we thought of you her whole life. It's like, we actually did. And here are the letters that we tried to get to you and they didn't get there. And so that, along with seeing me grow up, gave my birth mom a lot of peace to know like she was loved and cared for. And so I'm glad for that. My birth dad, I don't think he ever saw the life book before he died. And honestly, my birth dad's side of the family, since I wasn't known, he didn't know he had me, and none of them knew about me until I just showed up. The way that they embraced me was more like a surprise gift. Cool, let's like move forward. Like, yeah, you're here now, let's all have fun. There has been a lot less like looking back and thinking back on life. Where have you been? What was your life like? I was surprised and frustrated for the first few years that there was never in that conversation like, what happened to you? Where were you in foster care? When did you, like, they didn't ask any of those questions. Whereas on my birth mom's side, it's a lot of going backwards and like who was where when and who knew what when. And that's perhaps why the relationships are very different with my birth mom family versus my birth dad's side. Yeah.
Thank you very much. You you kind of answered our third question and so forth. So I'm going to jump to the fourth one here, which is your work as a mentor is more than just work. And can you address the idea of emotional labor and how you are able to stay in a place within yourself that allows the kids you work with to come to their own conclusions about their adoptions?
I love mentoring, and it's not just kids. All ages of adoptees, which I think is important because the development of our identity is very different than what we think of when we think of child development. You know, I work with 70-year-old adoptees whose birth parents were, you know, sent away to a home and there was such shame never to talk about it, that kind of thing. And so a 70-year-old adoptee is processing their adoption in like the way we would in like in those infant stages. And so I'm with them in the same sense that I am with a 12-year-old. And yeah, I just love it. It does not feel like emotional labor to me. It does not feel hard to separate my experience from theirs because I truly just believe every adoptee's outlook is very different and it should be. I don't want to indoctrinate any adoptees on my feelings and thoughts. Like there's so many different variables for every single adoptee that it wouldn't make any sense. I love giving helping adoptees find more language to describe their emotions. So in that sense, I have to listen really well in order to do that. I think you probably saw that in the book, that this is words. I love words, and I love finding the exact ones to represent the feelings. This is why I love the book, The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, to share all these words that we don't have yet to describe all the complexity of emotions. So yeah, I think it's really important that all of us adoptees go through the phases and stages, which Jaron Kim and Susan Bronco Alvarado, which are two incredible adult adoptee academics, created the adoptee consciousness model, which I just love. And it basically takes you through like what we've all seen, those of us who've been working with adoptees for this long, is like the trajectory of our discovery. And each phase is really important. I can put a link to that in the chat later, but also just very slowly going through things like Susan Harris O'Connor's transracial adoptee identity model, I think is really key. It's important to go through each stage, or to, as a mentor, I think I have a unique space for them to try out different things, like to, just in the same way that we like to wear this clothes when we're a teenager, and then we're in the 20s and we like this type of clothes, and we're in the 30s and we wear this type. Like, I like for all the mentees to be able to try on different ways of saying things, try on different ways of articulating, and that work is the healing and growth. It's not like that there's an end point to where you can say like, I'm an adoption abolitionist, or whatever point people get to. It's the work in between. So doing that is just a pleasure. It's so much fun.
I have a message here direct from Gabby, and she asks, Angela, you've met way more adoptees than I have, I'm sure. In your opinion, what is the difference for story sharers for people adopted at birth versus at an older, more cognitively aware age?
Huge difference in well, for those who are adopted as a teenager, if they had agency in their adoption, then I find that those adoptees feel way more in control of their life. And then that bleeds over into other things. Like, there's less of a need to process the emotional trauma of it all. And there's more of a need to just process the facts and the reality of it. Like, I went here and then here, so that's why I'm here now, versus a teenager who may have been adopted without being a huge process of the Child Protective Services case, whatever. For newborns, a huge difference is there's oftentimes no overt abuse or neglect. And so it's really hard for them to state, I'm upset that I'm adopted, or I'm frustrated. Like, there's a stronger feeling that they should just be grateful for everything, versus knowing you were removed from care because of abuse, because of neglect. You can't live with those people because of XYZ. We can try to keep you connected, but like, there's a story. For the newborn adoption, we don't have that a lot of times, and adoptive parents aren't always able to explain that either, and it talked about in the book, the microfiction, saying your birth mom loved you so much she gave you up for adoption. Like, oftentimes that's not true, because adoptive parents may have never met the birth parents, or if they did, the birth parents did not use that language. So for those adoptees, there is a difficulty to try to understand, why did I have to be adopted? And then a difficulty to say, maybe I don't like this. So yeah, there is I have seen a huge difference in the approach and their adoptee identity based on those two factors. It is something I'm really aware of right now, because I'm trying to train 5 adult adoptees to become mentors for my new nonprofit. And this is something they need to be aware of. because it plays out so much differently, and you can hear it in people's language. One of the key questions I ask most adoptees is, what was your parents' motivation to adopt? Or do you know what your parents' motivation to adopt was? And many times adoptees will say, like, oh, they were infertile, so they wanted a baby. And they may never have thought about what that means for them. You know, that's a very different answer than for me, which was my parents were part of the zero population growth movement. They thought we were going to overpopulate and outpace the resources that the world has to offer. And so they chose not to have more kids. They chose to adopt from foster care. That to me feels more about me than them. Whereas some parts of the infertility stories for adoptees don't tell them a lot about them. Like, how did I get to be in your home? Why me? Which is what we're really asking. But parents sometimes are answering it based on their emotionality, and that's so I found it interesting, the number of adoptees who've said, like, oh, I don't really know why they adopted me. I've never asked, or I'm scared to ask. I think they'll get upset if I ask. That kind of answer is really great fodder for more mentoring conversations in our sessions.
Thank you for that. And once again, you've already answered in essence part of number 5, so we're jumping to number 6.
Yeah, and I hope that last question made sense. I understand that I may have gone on different tangents, and I also may have spoken as though everybody understood the difference between, like, private domestic infant adoption versus foster care adoption. So if that assumption is wrong, please ask.
Absolutely. We'll monitor the chat to see. This is a 2-part question. Your dad was a big part of the story, it seems, until he wasn't. Did you have a chance to explore with him his feelings about your birth father?
Gosh, so astute. Thank you to whoever really had that question, because I don't think folks have asked me that yet. And that was one thing that was not shown in the film, and I really wanted to talk about this. So the book was, it was awesome for me to kind of work through the reality of that moment in the book, where we're just about to go meet my birth dad for the first time. We're in the hotel. I'm getting all dressed up. It took me a while to get dressed up, coming down the elevator, and then my dad is just there, and he's like, yeah, I'll see you afterwards, honey. And I was like, what? And then he did meet up with us after, when we were having food or whatever, and I was just like, huh, why would he come all this way? And I don't think my dad and I have really talked about it. And I really think my dad has kind of gotten off the hook, in the sense that for my whole life, I was really focused on my birth mother. And I think that's one reason why, when we all realized there's this birth dad here, that he hadn't prepared for that. He had prepared for birth mom, birth mom, birth mom, birth mom, birth mom. And then for my birth dad and I to look exactly alike, I think that is like a lot for him, because it's almost like he was never in danger, in the way that I talked about before with my mom saying, I feared I'd be replaced. I don't think my dad ever thought about that. And now here's this guy, and he has a huge family, and they're all really gregarious and big smiles, and they're kind of similar to me. And he is very, we have a good relationship, but he's really stoic. He's he's not like, you know, like me and my birth family, which we wear loud clothes, we like bright things. I look at my wallpaper, like, this is something my birth dad would love. And my dad has like white walls in his house, and he wears, like, you know, the same thing every day. So very different. So I think there was a sense of like, whoa. encroachment. And then my birth dad died, so now again, he's kind of off the hook and his place is solidified. I certainly do not think this was conscious for him. But something happened in that moment when we got close to meeting my birth dad that he couldn't do it. And that was just a surprise. He doesn't show any emotions. So yeah, that's kind of all I know. We haven't talked more about that. He thinks of my birth family, very positively and says only great things. But there is something emotional that hits for him, I can tell.
Thank you. And again, you kind of answered, the rest of it. You're really on point today. Thank you so much. What are 3 takeaways for transracially adopted families?
Oh, just in general?
Yes. What would you, what are most to you? 3 takeaways you would have for transracially adopted families.
Well, I wish I could back up before people become transracial families, for specifically white people I posted something on my Instagram that a family recently said to me, which I loved. This was a white couple who is open to adopting transracially. And it was the first time I didn't hear someone say, like, we'll just love anyone. We want to love a child of any color. They said, we are open to raising a child who will thrive in our neighborhood, thrive with our extended family community, and thrive in our school system or in our values, something like that. And that was so cool, so refreshing. It was like they knew that love is not enough. They knew in order to be successfully raising a child of color, their world had to also embrace a child of color. So, that's one thing I would love for all families to do before choosing to adopt. Also, just thinking about their own privilege and even having that option, thinking through hard things like, why is it that there are people of color available to be adopted at a higher rate than white folks? And like, if you really dig down, like, it was important for me when I was a kid and I would ask my parents, why couldn't any Black families adopt me? That was nothing that they were afraid of, or, it didn't scar them the way I hear families reacting to that question now, that adoptive parents will feel very like they're not, like, what, am I not enough? When in reality, we're trying to ask a question about the makeup and the kind of race relations in America. So to be able to say, since we have had a culture where Black and brown families have continually gotten dismantled by different practices, it's really common for Black families to not want to voluntarily start an adoption process, formal. Informally, yeah, and then the same is true on the other side. Like, because of white supremacy, it's really common for white people to march into an adoption agency, feel very comfortable and confident in saying, I want to do this, I want to go through this process, I'll give you my social security number, I'll give you my references for my work, you can check out my salary, like, here's all my information. Like, there's a reason why that feels comfortable and easy for white people and not so for people of color. I think, like, that's the pre-work that I plead agencies to do with folks. But after an adoption has happened, one takeaway I hope that people get from my book is the idea of the Sondersphere, which I am really proud of. And again, that's just a made up word. And it's just my hope of going beyond what we think of in open adoptions now, where there's the contract of, I'll send 3 letters and 3 letters a year, 2 visits, it's very contractual. And instead, let's go to the next step. I'm so glad we're past closed adoption era, but this open adoption era isn't good enough either. So the Saunders sphere is like genuine relationships with people who matter to the child. That it's not okay to like just move across the country or to feel afraid of the child's birth uncle without like a substantive reason, and say like you can't see them, but instead, no, this person is part of our family. And yes, they may have some vices like we all do. So we're going to create boundaries to make sure everyone is safe. But yeah, they're part of us. And I think that is, it feels so huge and almost dire. And I say this because of the immense work that so many adoptees are doing in their adulthood, usually around college time when they move out of their adoptive parents' house, that all of a sudden, not only are they perhaps in college, which is a huge thing, but they're also now trying to bring in all these new people in their lives because they weren't allowed to before they were 18, the magic age. And I feel like that is almost criminal. If these are really loving adoptive parents, then you would love them through this as well. Just like you help them learn how to ride a bike. You're there for the training wheels, for the taking them off, for the whatever. This is the same thing. Like, be there for each step as we integrate all these people in their lives. And then the last takeaway would be just the importance of adoptee relationships and having them separate from their adoptive parents, but allowing adoptees to be connected to other adoptees, especially important, I think, for transracial, where it is a really unique identity and experience. I think that's really key.
Thank you. I'm being aware of our time. We're down to about 2 minutes. We do have a couple of questions in chat. I'm going to leave it up to you, Cheryl, if you want to, if it's okay with you, Angela, if we ask you one of the questions from chat.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there are 2. Angela has asked 2 questions, so I'm just going to go down to the last one, and then if we have time, we can do the other one. She said, how strongly would you say that the IWA, the Indian Welfare Act, supports much of what you advocate for? Are you aware of anything like this for other minorities in order to minimize transracial adoptions?
ICWA is like, I wish we could do ICWA for people who are not, registered to a tribe, in the sense that it's such a clear-cut thing. And I think, yeah, for all people of color, we don't have that. And that's, I think I was petrified that ICWA would get overturned a few months ago. I'm so grateful that it's upheld. I'm actually kind of surprised by Amy Coney Barrett and the others, but the only thing that I'm aware of for others is the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, but it's not measurable in the same way that ICWA is. So the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act of 1994 says that every adoption agency should do due diligence to recruit Black and Brown families of color. There are only a couple agencies that I know who do this on the regular basis. Everybody else says, like, we can't find them, or there just happens to be more white people that always want to adopt, and or Black families will start the process, but so many of the practices, I know this from when I worked in different agencies, are they're not equitable, how the forms are created and different things. So they'll get kind of screened out or just decide to drop out. So Yeah, the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act is really great. I do think it needs to become enforceable to hold agencies accountable, which would then decrease the number of transracial adoptions. That's my hope. And to be clear, I have a couple episodes on my podcast. I don't believe that race match